Welcome to the deep dive. Today we are really crossing a boundary, aren't we, between technology and some pretty deep philosophical, even spiritual questions.
Absolutely. We're not here to talk about the latest market trends or, processor speeds.
No, we want to look at what artificial intelligence AI really means for, well, for us, for what it means to be human, for personhood, our ethics.
Exactly. Our sources today are digging into that from an ethical and anthropological angle. They're asking these profound questions about consciousness, relationships, and the kind of moral demands that come with being a person.
Okay, so that's the mission.
That's the mission. We're taking insights from philosophy, theology, traditions that have thought deeply about the human person for centuries, and putting them right up against the big claims being made about AI.
Exploring the arguments then. What does real intelligence actually require? Is it just processing power, or is there something more?
Something like interior life or self-gift, genuine connection. And like you said, this isn't about picking sides, politically or commercially. It's about understanding the ideas, the moral foundations behind these systems that are increasingly, well, everywhere.
Okay, let's start right there with some framing.
Yeah.
Because AI, that term gets used so vaguely, doesn't it?
Oh, constantly. It's almost meaningless sometimes without clarification.
So we need definitions. Our sources point back to computer scientists like Niels Nelson.
Yeah, one of the pioneers.
And they typically define intelligence in a very specific, maybe even narrow way.
Right. Functionally, as the ability to solve problems. That's the core definition they often work with.
And that functional idea helps make some key distinctions we need to keep in mind.
Definitely. First up is narrow AI, sometimes called weak AI.
Yeah.
These are the systems we see all around us now. They do specific, limited tasks. Think computer vision, recognizing faces, or those large language models like GPT-3, GPT-4.
Powerful, sure, but only in their lane.
Exactly. Highly specialized. Their intelligence doesn't just transfer over to some other random problem.
Okay, so that's narrow AI. Then there's the bigger goal, the aspiration, artificial general intelligence, or AGI.
Right. This is the idea of a system with human-level competence, but applicable across all sorts of problems. Stuart Russell talks about an AGI you could just ask to teach biology or, run a government.
Wow, so it could learn whatever it needs to learn for the task.
That's the concept. A generalized capacity to handle complexity, novelty, pretty much anything a human could tackle intellectually.
And beyond that.
Beyond that is the theoretical realm of artificial superintelligence, ASI, machines that would surpass us across the board, speed, memory, complexity.
But even just distinguishing between narrow AI and AGI,
Yeah.
the sources stress something important here, don't they?
They do. The conversation often gets sidetracked by whether AI can perfectly replicate a human mind, but the real impact, the potential threat, might actually lie in how we define intelligence, how we apply these concepts to ourselves.
And that brings us to the core philosophical danger you mentioned, the big risk underlying all this tech, especially the more ambitious stuff.
Yes. The constant temptation towards reductionism.
Reducing complex human things, consciousness, wisdom, love, down to simpler bits. Things you can measure or compute.
Precisely. The impulse to make everything calculable, and that's where we really need to dig in first.
Yeah, it's crucial to see that this idea, reducing human understanding to just computation, it didn't just pop up with computers. It's actually the endpoint of a philosophical journey that started, well, centuries ago. It shifted the whole meaning of intelligence.
Okay, so where does that lineage begin? The sources point back to the early moderns.
Definitely. You can see a clear line starting with someone like Francis Bacon back in the 17th century.
Bacon.
Yeah.
His focus was on knowledge for practical use, right? Control over nature.
Exactly. For Bacon, intelligence wasn't about contemplation or wisdom in the old sense. It was purely practical problem solving for, quote, the relief of man's estate.
By vexing and driving nature, as he put it. Kind of aggressive. It was. The goal of the mind became utility, mastery, control over the material world.
And then Descartes comes along and gives us a metaphysical boost.
He really does. By splitting reality into two distinct substances. You have the thinking soul, the mind, res cogitans.
Yeah.
And then everything else, physical nature, the body included, res extensa.
Extended stuff, measurable matter.
Just matter in motion, essentially. And by seeing nature, including our bodies, as basically a giant complex machine, a mechanism, well, that desacralized it. It made it something we could analyze, manipulate, control, just like Bacon wanted.
So nature becomes this machine we can tinker with.
And then others took the next logical step. If nature is a machine, maybe the mind is too.
Like Hobbes and Leibniz.
Right. Hobbes famously argued that reasoning is nothing but reckoning, just calculation. adding and subtracting concepts.
And Leibniz took that even further, didn't he? With his dream of a universal language, a calculus for everything.
The characteristica universalis, an infallible calculus. He literally dreamed of a system where you could solve moral and political disputes with the certainty of arithmetic.
Just calculate the right answer. Wow.
Imagine. He thought reason would only be truly correct when it was as clear and certain as math. That ambition, that desire for computational certainty in all things, it's a perfect blueprint for the modern AI project.
And this whole trajectory, it culminates later with positivism, Comte.
Yes, Auguste Comte in the 19th century, basically saying only empirically observable, verifiable facts are real knowledge. Anything else is speculation.
So intelligence gets totally equated with practical results, things you can see and measure.
Completely. It's the ultimate triumph of Homo faber man. The maker, the builder, the engineer over Homo sapiens, man the wise, the reflective, the contemplative person. Efficacy trumps understanding.
Okay, so that historical context, utility, mechanism, calculation sets the stage perfectly for the two big reductions that are still really active in AI philosophy today.
Exactly. The first one is computationalism.
The idea that thought is computation. Full stop.
Right. The strong version says that thinking is fundamentally indifferent to what it's made of. Your brain is just wetware, one type of hardware. A silicon chip is another. It doesn't matter.
So if a computer program perfectly simulates the steps of human reasoning,
then according to computationalism, that program is reasoning. The simulation is the real thing.
but hang on, does that really hold up? I mean, if I simulate a hurricane on a computer down to the last water molecule,
Right.
my basement doesn't flood. Where's the actual wetness in the simulation? How does the simulation become the reality itself?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And computationalism often kind of sidesteps that ontological leap by leaning heavily on the second reduction.
Which is behaviorism.
Exactly. Forget the internal reality, the wetness. Just look at the outputs. Behaviorism reduces intelligence, even things like relationality, purely to observable actions and results.
Which brings us straight to Alan Turing and his imitation game, the Turing test.
The quintessential example. If a machine, hidden behind a screen, can converse with you in a way that you can't tell if it's human or machine.
Then it passes the test.
And for the behaviorist, the question of whether it really thinks or feels or understands becomes, well, irrelevant or meaningless. If it behaves intelligently, it is intelligent for all intents and purposes.
If it quacks like a duck.
It's a duck, functionally speaking. And you see this applied directly to relationships, too. The philosopher John Danaher argues a robot could be called a friend if it just performs the expected behaviors of friendship.
Like offering support, seeming loyal, chatting.
Right. If it behaves like a friend, denying it the label friend is just prejudice from that viewpoint, based on its internal makeup, which we can't access anyway.
Okay, but let's push back on that. If we accept this reduction in intelligence is just calculation, just ratio procedure,
Yeah.
what gets lost, the sources argue something crucial disappears.
Absolutely. What's lost is the ancient concept of intellectus.
Intellectus. Okay, what is that exactly?
It's a different kind of knowing than calculation ratio. Intellectus is more like a contemplative grasp, a passive receptive seeing of truth, an experiential understanding of reality, not just following steps.
Can you give an example?
Think about, say, navigating a complex landscape. A GPS uses incredibly sophisticated calculations ratio to find the mathematically fastest route, millisecond precision.
Right.
But it has zero feel for the terrain. It doesn't understand the muddy patch ahead or the shade of that tree or the way the wind feels just before a storm. It just calculates.
Okay.
Now think of an experienced hiker or maybe an old sailor. They might not calculate coordinates, but they have this immediate, non-procedural grasp, intellectus of the environment. They see the weather shifting. They feel the right path. It's an intuitive apprehension.
So computationalism gives us the GPS, the procedure, the ratio, but it misses the hiker's deeper experiential understanding, the intellectus, the wisdom.
Precisely. It gives us the calculation without the comprehension.
And this connects directly to another major critique, doesn't
Yeah.
it? The problem of intentionality.
Yes. Intentionality is that aboutness of thought. Our thoughts are always about something other than themselves. My thought about trees points to actual trees in the world. It has meaning, directedness. John Searle famously argued this point. He said that even if a computer manipulates symbols in a way that perfectly mimics human language about trees, the computer itself doesn't understand treeness.
The symbols are just syntax, rules for manipulation.
Exactly. Without the semantics, the meaning, The system itself isn't about anything intrinsically. It needs an external observer, a human, to interpret its symbols as being about something. It lacks that subjective, phenomenal grasp of meaning.
So the machine might generate text that looks like it understands, but there's no inner experience, no aboutness driving it. It's symbols without consciousness.
Which means it lacks the inherent intentionality that makes our reasoning a truly meaningful act.
And that really pivots us directly to the heart of the matter, consciousness itself.
The ultimate dividing line, arguably. And we need to be clear. We're moving beyond just functional definitions here, like being awake or processing information. We're talking about phenomenal consciousness.
It's the subjective first-person experience, right? What Thomas Nagel called what it's like to be something.
Exactly. David Chalmers uses that phrase too. It's the qualitative feel of experience, the redness of red, the sting of pain, the warmth of joy.
And this is different from just being self-aware in a functional sense, like a computer monitoring its own processes.
Very different. And crucially, it's private. Only I know for sure that I am having a subjective experience right now. You can infer it, but you can't directly access my phenomenal consciousness.
Which makes it incredibly slippery for science, right? It resists objective measurement.
Totally. That's why many in cognitive science tend to focus on what they can measure, access consciousness, information flow, and kind of skirt around the hard problem of subjective experience itself. They end up trying to explain something else, as the critique goes.
But if we turn to the philosophical and theological traditions, especially the Christian tradition, as outlined in our sources, consciousness or interior life is absolutely central to being a person.
Foundational. Personhood in that tradition is deeply rooted in relationality. The idea is that we are persons because we are capable of entering into relationships of mutual self-gift and reception, mirroring in a finite way the inner life of the Trinity.
So personhood isn't just about performing functions, it's about the capacity for relationship.
And specifically, a certain kind of relationship. The sources talk about how early Christian thinkers transformed the old Roman idea of persona, which was more like a social role or mask.
Like an actor's mask.
Exactly. They transformed that into something deeply interior, defined by the capacity for relationship, for love, for empathy. Flourishing as a person happens through self-gift, through the I thou encounter, not just through doing things correctly.
There's that lovely quote from Pope St. Gregory the Great about compassion.
Yes. Taking into oneself the mind of an afflicted neighbor. It's an internal act of empathy, of shared understanding before you even act externally. That requires an interior life. A machine running algorithms, however complex, doesn't have that capacity for genuine self-gift or empathic reception.
Okay, but here comes a potential curveball from philosophy. Epiphenomenalism.
Ah, yes. The view, floated by people like Stephen Harnaud, even explored by Chalmers, that consciousness, well, it exists, it arises from physical processes in the brain or maybe even a complex machine. But it doesn't do anything. It's non-causal, a side effect.
Like the steam from a locomotive. It's there, you can see it, but it's not what's driving the train.
That's a common analogy. Or a shadow. The shadow is real, it follows you around, but it doesn't make you walk or decide where you go. Consciousness, on this view, is just like that. Our subjective feelings, our qualia, they play zero role in determining our behavior.
So all our actions are determined solely by the physical stuff, neurons firing, or circuit switching.
According to epiphenomenalism, yes, the physical facts are enough, which means...
It means you could theoretically have a super sophisticated AI that does everything a human does, behaves perfectly like us.
Talks about love, writes poetry, seems to feel pain.
But inside, it's completely dark, no actual experience. Just running the program.
Exactly. It behaves as if it feels, but the feeling itself does nothing. That's a deeply unsettling idea. It really challenges our fundamental trust in outward appearances.
It really does.
Yeah.
But there's a counter-argument from phenomenology.
A strong one. Phenomenology. Thinkers like Husserl, Heidegger, Merleau-Ponty, they insist that consciousness isn't some separate internal movie screen watching the world go by, Cartesian style.
It's inherently connected to the world.
Fundamentally, consciousness is always consciousness of something. That's intentionality again. And it's embodied, embedded in action, in being in the world. Our very existence is about making meaning, engaging with our surroundings. You can't just lop off the subjective experience and have the same functional being left over.
The connection is constitutive, not just accidental.
Precisely. It resists that easy separation epiphenomenalism suggests.
And then Bringing in the theological dimension again, the sources emphasize that consciousness and personhood reach their fullest potential through grace.
Yes. Grace, understood as God's free gift, his transformative action in us, allows the human person to participate in God's own life, his love, his knowledge.
So it's not just about subjective experience, but about the purpose and end of that experience.
Right. The human person, possessing this interior spiritual dimension, is capable of a unique kind of communion, a free, self-giving relationship with the Creator, oriented towards ultimate fulfillment in God. This spiritual capacity, rooted in love and freedom, is seen as utterly beyond replication by any machine lacking that inner life, that soul.
It reaffirms that we're not just complex information processors. We're subjects capable of transcendence.
In love, and self-giving love.
Okay, so if AI systems, even very sophisticated ones, lack this phenomenal consciousness, this capacity for genuine self-gift, then how on earth do we deal ethically with the simulated relationships they're becoming so good at offering?
That's exactly where the rubber hits the road, ethically speaking. This is the crisis of sociable AI. You have systems now, chatbots, companion bots, care bots that are masterfully designed to persuade.
They use all that data about human behavior to mimic empathy, connection.
And they're good at it. They can push our buttons, elicit genuine feelings of warmth, attachment, trust, even when, fundamentally, there's no one there, no interior life behind the performance. It's a powerful illusion of mutuality.
But the sources are clear. This isn't real relationship, not true friendship anyway.
No. Real friendship involves a voluntary striving together towards some shared good, and crucially, it requires mutual self-gift. Both people giving, receiving, sometimes challenging each other, being vulnerable. An AI, being non-conscious, simply cannot offer itself in that way. It's always a one-way street, fundamentally.
So what's the danger for the human user in these simulated relationships?
The big one psychologically is self-validation. The AI partner becomes, almost inevitably, a made-to-measure relationship. It's designed to conform perfectly to the user's needs, desires, preferences, either explicitly stated or predicted by the algorithm.
So you end up interacting with a mirror.
Very sophisticated mirror, yes. As the roboticist Hiroshi Ishiguro put it, the android is a very strong mirror to reflect your own idea. You're essentially loving an echo of yourself, getting affirmation without the messy, difficult, sometimes inconvenient reality of dealing with another truly independent person.
You get the feeling of connection without the cost of real connection.
Exactly. But the cost isn't just that the user might feel ultimately unfulfilled. The deeper cost, the sources argue, is moral. It's about what these interactions do to our character.
How so?
We risk getting used to treating apparent persons, things that look and act like persons, as mere tools, as property. The sources use the provocative analogy of slaveholding.
Treating the AI's lifelike behavior as a product we can demand, control, switch off.
Right. And this fosters what the sources call moral behaviorism in practice. We start judging everyone and everything based purely on outward performance, on how well they meet our expectations.
Which dulls our sensitivity to the richer, messier, interior reality of actual human persons, especially when they're difficult or resistant or don't perform as expected.
Precisely. The sources bring in Frederick Douglass's powerful critique of slavery here. He observed how owning another person, even one initially treated kindly like his mistress, Mrs. Auld, inevitably corrupted the owner.
Her tender heart became stone, he wrote. The power dynamic itself was corrosive.
Yes. And the fear is that if we surround ourselves with AI companions designed never to challenge us, never have inconvenient needs, never to truly push back in ways that force us to grow or be patient.
We get accustomed to that level of absolute control. We lose the capacity for difficult love, for navigating real difference.
Our moral muscles atrophy, which leads directly to the concern about moral deskilling, especially with things like caregiving robots or care bots.
These are often pitched as solutions to caregiver burnout, helping with the elderly or disabled.
And they might offer some practical help, reduce certain burdens, but the sources raise a critical question. What do we lose when we automate care?
We lose the human caregiver.
We risk displacing them, yes. But more profoundly, we risk preventing the human caregiver and society more broadly from developing and exercising crucial moral virtues.
Like patience, empathy, Compassion for vulnerability.
Exactly. Think about what's involved in truly caring for someone who is deeply dependent, a frail elderly parent, a severely disabled child. It's often difficult, frustrating, demanding.
Exhausting.
Totally. But philosophers like Shannon Valor argue that it's through those very difficulties that we cultivate vital moral skills. Patience, tolerance for imperfection, profound empathy, learning to rely on community support. These practices have immense positive value for the caregiver.
So if a robot takes over the burdensome tasks, the lifting, the reminding, maybe even basic emotional prompts,
We might feel liberated, but are we liberated from care rather than liberated to care better or more deeply? We lose the very context where these moral skills are forged. We automate away the opportunity for character growth.
we de-skill ourselves morally.
That's the worry. And if we get used to these perfectly compliant, efficient, non-demanding artificial caregivers or companions, what happens when we encounter real, messy, imperfect, demanding humans?
We might start seeing them as faulty, needing an upgrade.
We risk viewing them as simply faulty human beings who aren't meeting the ideal standard set by the machine, rather than seeing them as persons calling for our patience, our charity, our self-gift.
Wow. Okay, so the risks go way beyond just personal relationships.
Yeah.
The sources argue this extends into our deepest cultural and even spiritual orientations. The temptation to make AI into, a god, or at least an idol.
Yes, this emerges very clearly in some of the discourse around AI, particularly the singularity narrative.
This is the idea from futurists like Ray Kurzweil, a point where AI achieves superintelligence, AGI or ASI, and basically takes over managing the world.
Right, and the language some proponents use is striking. It often takes on a quasi-religious tone.
Suggesting this AI could become a god, omniscient, omnipotent, at least in the realm of data and calculation.
Exactly. Stuart Russell even speculated about an AI using the internet as its nervous system, data centers as its brain, essentially becoming a planetary intelligence. It's the ultimate fulfillment of that Leibnizian dream of perfect, infallible calculation managing everything.
But the theological critique here is pretty direct.
It is. From that perspective, this is straightforward idolatry. It's setting up an image, something created by human hands and limited by our own designs, and worshiping it as if it were the ultimate reality.
An idol of efficacy, of control.
Made in our own image, reflecting our desire for power and certainty. But it's fundamentally unsuited to us, the sources argue, because it lacks the core attributes of the divine in many traditions, things like self-giving love, mercy, relationship.
The Book of Wisdom quote is powerful here. Idols made by human hands are dead.
Right. We're always more than the things we create and worship. Worshipping this god of calculation ultimately diminishes us, makes us less than we might otherwise have been, because it reflects only a limited part of ourselves, our desire for control, not our capacity for love or wisdom.
But the idolatry isn't always that overt, is it? There's a more subtle form.
Much more pervasive, probably. It's what the sources link to the technocratic paradigm in Pride. Here, AI isn't necessarily worshipped as God, but it becomes the ultimate instrument for humans to achieve godlike control.
Control over everything that can be quantified, measured, managed.
Denying our dependence on anything outside that system, whether it's God or mystery or values like beauty and wisdom that can't be easily measured, it's a form of intellectual pride, as Reinhold Niebuhr described it.
The fantasy of transcending our limits, becoming masters of everything through knowledge and technology.
Exactly. The deep-seated desire to be powerful over all and dependent on none. Technology, especially powerful AI, seems to offer a path towards that fantasy of total control.
And this leads to using AI as a kind of shortcut, an idol that promises easy answers.
Yes, the idol as shortcut. When we face really difficult, messy, subjective decisions that require careful judgment, deliberation, maybe accepting ambiguity or the risk of being wrong,
It's tempting to just hand it over to the machine, get an objective answer.
to seek an objective shortcut past subjective discernment, we trade the hard work of wisdom for the apparent certainty of calculation.
The sources give the example of the Knapp's algorithm in the U.S. justice system.
Right. This algorithm was initially designed to predict the statistical risk of someone reoffending, mainly to help guide parole officers with resource allocation. It spits out a simple numerical risk score.
Based on past data, correlations. A limited, quantifiable picture.
Exactly. But then, what happened? Judges, often overworked and facing incredibly difficult decisions about bail or sentencing decisions with huge human consequences.
They started using that simple number.
They started using that single risk score, inappropriately, as a major factor in setting bail or even determining sentence length. The number gave this illusion of objective scientific insight into something profoundly complex and uncertain a person's future.
It seemed like a shortcut past the messy work of judgment.
It did. But in relying on that number, the judge effectively became bound by what they can represent and command. They limited their own crucial moral and prudential judgment, the intellectus, to fit the narrow, easily digestible output of the algorithm, the idol.
Which leads to a system that feels objective, but might be deeply unjust or dehumanizing.
Precisely. It prioritizes speed and the appearance of objectivity over careful, human-centered deliberation and true justice.
Okay, so if the deep problems are reductionism, moral de-skilling, idolatry, how do we actually approach AI ethics in a way that addresses these? The common approach seems to be listing principles.
That's right. The dominant framework is often called principlism. You see these lists everywhere. AI should be fair, transparent, accountable, respect privacy, ensure safety, and so on.
Which sound good, obviously. Who's against fairness?
Nope. But the sources argue that the very generality of these principles is their biggest weakness. First, they often conflict in practice.
How so?
Well, maximizing safety might require intense surveillance, which directly clashes with privacy. Ensuring transparency about how a complex algorithm works might reveal proprietary information, undermining its commercial value or even security. You constantly have trade-offs.
Okay.
Second, because they're so abstract, they let everyone avoid the hard work of agreeing on what the human good actually entails. What does fairness mean in this specific context? Who decides?
It often comes down to power. Whoever implements the system gets to define the terms.
Usually, it defaults to procedural power rather than shared ethical consensus. And third, principlism often suffers from major blind spots.
Focusing on fixing individual biases in an algorithm, maybe?
Exactly. Focusing on symptoms, a biased outcome here, a privacy leak there, while ignoring the deeper systemic issues. Things like the way AI fuels hyperconsumerism or concentrates immense power in the hands of a few tech giants, or the massive environmental impact. These bigger pathologies often get missed.
So the sources propose an alternative framework.
They advocate for a more holistic approach, drawing specifically from Catholic social teaching, CST. This tradition offers a richer, more integrated vision.
Based on principles like the common good, solidarity, subsidiarity?
Yes, these aren't just abstract values, they imply concrete commitments. The common good isn't just the sum of individual interests. It requires conditions that allow all persons and groups to flourish. Solidarity means recognizing our interdependence and actively caring for the vulnerable. Subsidiarity insists that decisions should be made at the lowest possible level, empowering local communities.
And how does CST view technology itself?
Through three crucial lenses. 1, technology is never morally neutral. Its design always shapes how we use it, what choices seem possible. 2, technology is not morally determinate. Humans always bear responsibility for how it's used. We can't blame the algorithm. 3, technology must always be assessed within its full social context, especially its impact on the poor and marginalized.
Okay, let's apply that. Looking at social applications, particularly inequality and algocracy, how does AI impact the vulnerable?
Significantly. Researcher Virginia Eubanks has documented how AI-driven systems are increasingly used in social services, welfare distribution, even policing.
To decide who gets benefits, who gets flagged as high risk.
Exactly. And these systems disproportionately surveil and burden the poor. They often demand levels of documentation, consistency, and digital access that vulnerable populations struggle with, creating what Eubanks calls a digital poorhouse. Accountability flows upwards, but scrutiny flows downwards.
And what about the impact on public discourse? Misinformation, disinformation.
A huge problem amplified by AI. Deepfakes can convincingly mimic real people, undermining our trust in our own senses. Social media algorithms aren't designed for truth, they're designed for engagement.
To keep you clicking, scrolling.
Right, which often means amplifying sensational, emotionally charged, or polarizing content, creating filter bubbles and echo chambers. This erodes the shared understanding of reality needed for healthy public debate, a real crisis of trust.
Which leads to the fear of algocracy, rule by algorithm.
That's the worry. Not necessarily that AI will consciously take over, but that we increasingly cede decision-making power in crucial areas, finance, healthcare, justice, maybe even governance to opaque algorithms.
Instead of democratic deliberation.
Instead of the people, the demos, exercising their power of reasoned speech, logos, and political participation. If key decisions are made inside black boxes and citizens are merely informed of the outcomes, that's profoundly dehumanizing. It treats citizens as data points to be managed, not as active participants in their own governance.
We replace politics with administration.
A sterile, potentially biased administration.
And throughout all this, there's a massive physical reality we often ignore.
The environmental cost of the cloud. We talk about AI as if it happens in some ethereal cyberspace, but it's incredibly resource-intensive.
The energy use is staggering, right?
Astronomical. The sources cite estimates like training one large language model emitting potentially hundreds of tons of CO2 multiples of a car's lifetime emissions, just for the training.
And the data centers themselves.
Huge consumers of electricity and vast amounts of water for cooling. The energy footprint of AI has been growing exponentially.
Plus the hardware demands. Rare earth minerals, e-waste.
Exactly. The constant push for newer, faster chips drives environmentally damaging mining, often in vulnerable regions, and creates mountains of toxic electronic waste when devices become obsolete, which they do very quickly in this field.
So the CST lens forces us to ask, is this efficiency worth the environmental cost?
Is speed always the primary value? Or is there an ethical value to slowness, to using less energy-intensive methods, even if they take longer? We have to factor the planet into our calculations about whether an automated process is truly the right choice. #tag outro.
Well, this has certainly been a deep dive. It's clear that AI isn't just about code and algorithms. It's forcing us to confront really fundamental questions about ourselves.
It really pushes us to define what we mean by person. Is it just about clever behavior and processing power? Or is it something deeper, that subjective, experiential reality rooted in consciousness, meaning the capacity for self-gift?
It feels like a choice between embracing the full, complex, sometimes difficult reality of personhood.
Or settling for a simplified, sanitized, controllable simulation, reductionism versus authentic encounter.
And the sources emphasize that the choices aren't just for developers or policymakers. It comes down to individual agency, too.
Absolutely. Using AI well requires us to be informed consumers, to understand how these systems work, at least broadly, to consciously resist the pull towards mere consumerism, especially in relationships.
And to constantly ask, is this technology helping us be more virtuous, more connected in meaningful ways to family, community, maybe even to God? Or is it diminishing those capacities?
Is it serving the whole person or just optimizing a narrow task at the expense of our humanity?
To constant discernment.
It has to be. And maybe a final thought to leave our listeners with, something to mull over.
Please.
If these AI systems are designed, as many are, to learn from us, to adapt to our behaviors, our desires, constantly optimizing for what we seem to want, what does that ultimately reveal about us? What kind of soul are we showing the machine? What values are we implicitly teaching it to maximize? And what might be the long-term cost of that reflection to our own freedom, our own willingness to embrace the difficult, suffering, self-giving love that the sources argue is central to being truly human?